Yeah, I think you better hang on. Just a couple seconds. Okay, we're back live here. So the resolution that's on the table, and I guess my question would be, Councillor Withey would like to have one that also displays speed. Kevin, can you tell me what that would be called?
I'm not sure the one that Andrew just had. I think that's what Councillor Withey is referring to, but it would be more of a stationary radar detection sign.
Okay, so Councillor Withey, you missed that resolution. It was on the table and they couldn't get a seconder. So let's vote on this one. We can do two resolutions. So all in favor of the white box resolution? And that carries. Now, Councillor Withey, pay attention, because I mentioned earlier that if I could get a mover and seconder, we would have a resolution that says it is recommended that staff be directed to investigate the acquisition of a radar speed display sign system and report back on full costing, funding source, and potential locations for installation. I need a mover and seconder for that one. Councillor Thompson, you so move?
I actually have a question. First of all, is this portable? Is this one of those portable ones we're talking about? Or permanent ones?
Through you, Mayor, I believe Councillor Withey is talking about the stationary one, not one on a trailer.
Okay.
I agree with that. I mean, they can move, but the trailer ones I don't agree with. They're too expensive, and as you mentioned, you can't use them in winter. So I think that's not helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson?
Well, thank you. And I don't disagree with that at all. I'm just wondering though, are these similar to what the 23 the District of Muskoka has then? And if so, are they lendable to us if we ever needed them?
Andrew?
Through your worship to Councillor Thompson, the unit highlighted here with the brochure from a company called Calitech are the ones the district uses, and they are movable. The issue with them in the wintertime is the solar panel becomes covered in snow and needs to be cleared.
Okay, so this is just investigation. We can bring back a couple options on it, right? So do we have a mover and seconder? Councillor Withey moves. Councillor Thompson seconds. All in favor? And that carries. So Andrew or Kevin, whoever's doing it, you have two types to bring back a report on. Okay? Thank you. Short-term rental accommodation use in flood-prone lands. Kirsten, are you still here? I know a number of councillors have been contacted by people who have short-term rentals in flood zones, and our staff basically can't support licensing them. So we asked to put this on the agenda for discussion and what we can do moving forward. Kirsten?
Thank you, Your Worship. We have had quite a few inquiries from existing short-term rental property owners whose properties are located within lands that are either flood fringe or flood prone. And the zoning bylaw that was adopted by council last December does not permit a short-term rental as an accessory use in lands that flood at all. So from that perspective, we've been advising the property owners that have been looking for short-term rental licenses that they would need to do site-specific zoning amendments in order to permit that use. And that is still the option that staff would recommend moving forward with, because from a wholesale perspective, it's not something that we think is feasible to just blanket permit them everywhere. So that's why it might be easier to look at them all up from a site-specific perspective, and then each one can be evaluated and see what the risk and flood potential of each property is as we go through that evaluation.
Questions? Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Your Worship. I suggest we change the bylaw, because we're in a situation where we have people that can be there on a year-round basis, and this is done from the respect of safety. So here we have the ability to get these properties on short-term rental if they so desire, and we could amend the bylaw to have blackout periods. So the very essence of the bylaw is to protect people. Now we have, I feel, a stronger position and better opportunity to do that while providing people with a viable use of their property, and for most of them, the reason for purchasing their property. So I think it's really counterintuitive that we have this in the bylaw, and that they can rent them out on a full-time basis and put people at risk during those flood windows, and we have no recourse, no control over it. So I think this provides us an opportunity here. I'm curious to what everyone else has to say.
Kirsten, do you want to respond to that before I go to the next person, or you just want to hear it all?
Whatever you prefer, Your Worship. Yeah.
Well, this is very specific, changing the bylaw, so let's talk to that first.
Okay. The idea of allowing the blanket permission in these specific zones, there's currently 3 zones in the zoning bylaw that are different types of natural resource zones, and only one of them permits a dwelling as a matter as of right. It's and none of the existing dwellings can be expanded or rebuilt or changed in any way without being recognized through a planning approval. So it's very difficult for the planners to be able to recommend that this would be a good idea, because it is all about safety, and because there shouldn't be any development necessarily in these locations to begin with. Giving additional permitted uses to those properties is not necessarily a good planning practice. So if council was looking to have the bylaw amended in general, I don't believe it's something that the planners would be able to recommend approval of. I just wanted to let you know that.
Councillor Fitzgerald, follow up, and then we'll keep going.
Thank you. Again, it just seems counterintuitive that we have an opportunity to limit when the property is used if they become STRs. So I wonder, when common sense prevails, then we have to use our power as a committee of adjustment or a planning committee and allow this to happen, because it's the safest thing to allow to happen. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Kirsten, for your response. I kind of concur with Councillor Fitzgerald, although I do think maybe it's one of those, could we ask for a bit more information as to how we might deal with it? Because as we've all been contacted by people who got caught, right, in the sense of we now have short-term rental licensing, But the people, and so they try to do their due diligence and get a license. They can't because of zoning. But if we didn't have the licensing, they'd be out there renting anyway, you know, and for a number of people, they bought their places because they could afford it they can rent it as a short-term rental, which means that they can do that. And so I kind of feel like we've got a whole bunch of people that have been caught because of our new bylaw around short-term rental and licensing. So I sort of feel like they've been caught. They're trying to be good citizens to get a license. Now they can't, and now they have a property that is really expensive. So I understand from a planning perspective why we can't carte blanche just say, you know, okay, it's all right, you can do whatever you want in a flood zone. But there might be maybe there's a halfway, you know, maybe if they have to come to do site come to committee for a one-off, maybe it's a lower fee or something like that, or there's a form they fill out that helps them, assist them. I just feel like I don't think we should abandon the people that are trying to be good citizens and who were and have been renting, you know, so we now know about it. And maybe they're not in areas where I know I heard from one person, they've never actually had a flood. So, and I'm not saying, I understand the liability, we've been through all of that. And I understand the reason for going forward, we don't allow new building within flood zones. Absolutely makes sense. But there might be other, you know, saw-off solutions that sort of a midway where we have a blackout time where, you know, during a potential flood that they're not allowed or the liability rests with them or something. I don't know what the agreement looks like, but it seems to me that there's more work to do to look at a couple of other options. And I don't know what they are, but I think there's something. So I concur with Councillor Fitzgerald that there's something we need to do.
Councillor Wiebe.
Thank you, Worship. I would back those comments up by Councillor Alcock and Councillor Fitzgerald. I think that at the end of the day, from a safety perspective, I would hate to see full-time renters caught in a dangerous flood situation. What if we can ensure that homes that may flood in the spring are vacant? We've actually done the best by our taxpayers. So that's number one. Number two, I do understand our staff's perspective from looking at each one because it's tough. Sometimes you do a blanket change of bylaw and now we're back in 6 months saying, wait a minute, we've missed a few things here. People have been caught on the other side of this topic. So what I would maybe even put forward is perhaps it does need to be a site specific and they need to apply for a zoning change. But again, staff's hands are tied. It's about a $2,000 application fee just to simply do what we think is right by everyone. So if we could reduce the fee to staff time to a nominal rate or something like that, I think just let's try and solve both problems at the same time and without putting anyone in harm's way, because we as a government couldn't be more nimble. So that's where I stand on it.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Worship. I pretty much agree with everything I've heard so far. The reality is that these short-term rentals would not be rented during flood season anyway. I guess they could be, but if I'm thinking of being a renter, I don't think I would want to be there in March and April when the flood, primarily the flood season is anyway. Maybe another solution too would just be granting licenses to people in those zones and just say, but have an exclusion period or a blackout period, if you like, of March and April when those areas are prone to flooding. And another option too, I know there are occasions when NR zones would get compromised by flooding, say, at other times of the year. But, we know pretty much ahead of time when that's going to happen. And these people in these zones could be said, look, we know there's water coming down the Big East River or from Fox Lake system or whatever, and it's going to be causing problems for you for the next couple of weeks. And so, you're excluded from rental during that period as well. I mean, that rarely happens, but it's also an option. So I would just rather see us have a carte blanche to say, okay, you have a license if you're in an NR zoning, but you are not allowed to rent during these 2 months of the year, or these weeks, whatever. And I think the majority of people that are in those zonings would probably be okay with that.
Councillor Stone?
Through you to Kirsten, can I ask you to describe how a blackout period might be functional with planning?
First.
Do we enforce it?
I believe that if the zoning was amended to permit it as an accessory use, there could be restrictions placed on the actual license, because we're talking about two separate components. There's the zoning, which would permit or not permit the use. And then there's also the licensing portion. So perhaps through the licensing, there could be limitations placed on when it could be used. However, from that perspective, we don't enforce those sorts of things normally on a proactive basis, but it's something that we could look at if that was the case.
Councillor Schumacher?
Yeah, I would, through you, Mayor Terziano, I would agree with a lot of what has kind of been said by Councillors Alcock, Weeb, and Fitzgerald. I guess my question through you to Kirsten is, I mean, if people have these rental places and we're allowing a year-round rental, what is the repercussion for the town if flooding happens? I mean, it's going back to obviously the landlord, and they're going to come back on us and say, well, you allowed us to have somebody in there year-round while flooding occurs.
Kirsten?
Through you, Your Worship. We have had situations in the past where, and I believe it was just off the Big East River last year, where people were renting an Airbnb property and had to be rescued by the fire department because they couldn't get out and they were up on the roof of the building. So there is additional cost to the town from that perspective, that we would have more, we might be called out more and have to deal with more situations from that regard. However, long-term renters are, I would think they'd be more aware of when the property could flood and would be advised that they had to leave, whereas the short-term people coming in from other areas would not necessarily know what was going on.
So Kirsten, I wonder if maybe, given that you're hearing what most of council thinks, and they're thinking that we need to find a way to make this happen for these folks, just so we don't hang ourselves, can you come back to us with some of the pros and cons and tell us why we shouldn't be doing it, so that we can overrule you and tell you to do it anyways, but do it in such a way that we're not going to hang ourselves when we tell you that? Is that
Absolutely, that's something we can definitely do.
okay? Do you need a resolution to do that, or can we just bring it back to the?
I think there is a resolution prepped.
Do we have one, Crystal? We'll get one if we don't. While we're waiting for that, let's go on to our last item of business, and that's revisiting the park-to-park request. And just by way of a little bit of history, we did used to fund them to the tune of $3,000 a year. We last did that in 2009, 11, and 12, have not provided funding since then. We appointed a council representative in the 2014-2018 term of council. We did not provide a representative in 2018 to 22. And we have always thought that we could have them as a deputation to council, or invite a member of council as a guest too when they wanted somebody there. The one councillor who did serve in that capacity for a while, I think, found that it was, not necessarily worth the amount of time they would spend attending those meetings for what the councillor could provide to them. So that's kind of the history on the park to park. I don't know whether anybody wants to do anything new or different. Councillor Weeb.
Thank you, Worship. Just if someone on staff could remind me, did we put any monies forward for the mountain biking group and their new trail development? Or was it just some staff time and assistance?
Denise, can you
Well, only-
answer that, or who?
I think Julia actually was working with Scott Oval on that, your worship. I'm not sure if she can speak to that component. I don't believe we put any funds forward, but yeah, I see Deputy Mayor saying, no, I don't believe we did, but Julia can confirm.
Yeah, so in the 2021 budget, there has been no money that's been allocated to that mountain bike trail. And there's no money allocated to the trail, parks to park rather, trail to trail.
Deputy Mayor Alcock?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just, I'd be willing to support putting $3,000 into park to park. Because I'm not necessarily saying we should have a council rep for the reasons you just referred to. I think that a $3,000 investment in a trail that we previously supported quite actively. And I mean, I think it probably would be nice to see a bit more information that was provided as to the benefits, but I think it fits right now with our whole emphasis as we proceed with COVID, that we want more people to be outside, that we're an active community, that we support trail development. You know, that last presentation that we had from the BIA and the chamber about creating trails and doing all of the outdoor activities as something new around Heritage Place, that it just fits with our current motto as to who we are as a municipality. And I think it fits especially with you know, the COVID going forward. So I don't think $3,000 is a big ask. You know, so I certainly would be supportive of putting that motion on the table.
Councillor Withey?
Thank you, Worship. I mean, I've got nothing against trails and activities and all those things. The one thing that just struck me about the presentation earlier was the emphasis, and even to the presenter's admission, that it's mostly ATVers. And even though they call them multi-use trails, it seemed to be all about ATV. And that sort of struck me as like these snowmobile clubs and putting trails, and, you know, are they going to start knocking on our door because we gave money to basically what's essentially an ATV trail? Maybe I'm simplifying it, but that jumped out at me in the presentation, that it seemed to be ATVers primarily. Even, you know, it's a great system that goes from Perry Sound to, I forget where it said, but even though it said multi-purpose, I didn't get that sense. I got the sense that it was basically an ATV group that had a different name. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but for that reason, I'd be a little hesitant in throwing taxpayer money at it.
Councillor Weeb?
Thank you, Worship. I would support those comments by Councillor Withey.
Councillor Alcock?
I don't disagree at all with that. I agree. And going back to the presentation, there was a lot of emphasis on ATVing. I think the original intent was to be multi-use. So perhaps, and he did make reference to it, maybe what we could do is ask for a bit more information as to the stats around what the intention is with respect to walking and cycling, especially walking, cycling, and cross-country skiing. If in fact there is any of that sort of activity, then maybe we can revisit it. But if I actually completely agree, if it's all ATVing, then I might reconsider it.
So you were going to put a motion on the table to give them 3,000. Are you going to look for a seconder or withdraw that?
I guess I'll withdraw it, but is it possible, can we ask for more information about the use of the trails? So I might be willing to bring it back if we had more information, or is that something you'd like me to do and follow up? I can do that.
Why don't you follow up on that?
All right.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Maybe some clarification, if someone could. I know when Mr. Ryland made his presentation, he talked about Kilbear Park to Kearney, I think primarily. But then when we saw the map up on the screen, it looked like there was access to the Huntsville area. And I'm just wondering, was that the case, or did I see something that wasn't there? I mean, if that's the case.
To Algonquin.
To Algonquin, but through Huntsville?
Yeah. Well, the map was so small, I couldn't tell for sure if it actually came into Huntsville.
Just thinking, Your Worship, if there is a portion of that, I guess, where we have local access, and I know we're the most snowmobile friendliest town in all of Ontario, and I guess the same holds true for ATVs. I'm not sure, but anyway, I think for $3,000, I would have no problem supporting that. But if council feels otherwise, I'm okay with that as well.
I'm at your mercy, council. I'm moving on to the next item of business if somebody doesn't move a motion. Okay, I'm actually moving backwards to the short-term rental. I do have a motion now. I need a mover and seconder. It will read that it is recommended that staff be directed to investigate the short-term rental accommodation, rental use, and natural resource zoning provisions to investigate potential options to address short-term rental license applications in restricted zones and report back to General Committee. Can I get Councillor Thompson to move and Councillor Wiebe to second? Thank you. All in favor? And that carries. And that brings us to the end of our agenda, thankfully. I have a resolution. Oh, I don't have it moved by anybody. I have a resolution moved by everyone. Councillor Wiebe and seconded by Deputy Mayor Alcock. It is recommended that staff, oh, hang on, I picked up the wrong one. I did have one, hang on. I do have a resolution moved by Councillor Schumacher and seconded by Deputy Mayor Alcock that is recommended that we do now adjourn at 1:38 p.m. And we should have done a long time ago. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you, council. Thank you, staff. That was a long one.